The morning fog rolled thick through Willow Creek, Tennessee, the kind that made everything look like it was drowning in milk. Sheriff Darren Moss stood at the edge of Pinewood Trail, where the asphalt crumbled into gravel and the gravel gave way to dirt, staring at the place where Natalie Howard's car had been found 9 years ago, November 2011. He remembered it like yesterday. The red Honda Civic with the driver's door hanging open, keys still in the ignition, her purse on the passenger seat with $63 still inside. No blood, no struggle, just absence. Now, in 2020, he was back here because of a phone call that had come 3 days ago from a forensic lab in Nashville. DNA results. A match. A name that had made his stomach drop and his hands shake so badly he'd had to set down his coffee mug. Marcus Webb. Marcus Webb, who had been Natalie's youth group leader at Willow Creek Baptist Church. Marcus Webb, who had organized the search parties when she disappeared. Marcus Webb, who had stood in the town square with Natalie's mother, Ellen Howard, holding her hand while she sobbed into the microphone, begging for her daughter's safe return. Darren could still see Marcus's face that day, the tears streaming down his cheeks, the way his voice cracked when he said, "Natalie is like a daughter to me. Please, if anyone knows anything at all, come forward." The memory made Darren's jaw tighten. He turned away from the trail and walked back to his cruiser, where Deputy Amara Chan was waiting, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. "You okay, boss?" she asked. "No," Darren said. He leaned against the hood, feeling the cold metal through his jacket. "I've known Marcus for 15 years. He was at my daughter's baptism. He helped my wife set up the church fundraiser for pediatric cancer. And now I have to go arrest him for murder." Amara was quiet for a moment. She was young, only 28, but she'd seen enough in her 5 years with the department to know when silence was the only appropriate response. "The DNA was found on the scarf, right?" she finally said. "The one they pulled from the lake last month?" Darren nodded. The scarf had been tangled in the roots of a submerged tree near Miller's Bend, about 8 miles from where Natalie's car had been found. It was white with blue flowers, and Ellen Howard had identified it immediately from the photos. Natalie had worn it the day she disappeared. The DNA lab had found skin cells under the fabric fibers, cells that didn't belong to Natalie. They'd run it through the system, checked it against the samples taken from persons of interest back in 2011, and there it was, Marcus Webb. "Ellen doesn't know yet," Darren said quietly. "I'm going to tell her after the arrest. I can't tell her before. She'll want to confront him herself." Amara nodded. "When are we bringing him in?" "This afternoon. 3 o'clock. He teaches a Bible study at the church on Tuesday afternoons. I want to do it there, quietly, before word gets out." "It's going to get out fast, Darren." "I know." The town of Willow Creek had a population of just over 4,000 people. Everyone knew everyone. Secrets didn't stay buried for long, and a cold case solved after 9 years, especially one involving someone like Marcus Webb, would explode like a grenade in a glass room. Darren thought about Natalie. She'd been 22 when she disappeared, fresh out of community college with a degree in early childhood education. She'd been planning to move to Knoxville to start a teaching job in January 2012. She'd been full of light, the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and left notes of encouragement in people's mailboxes. Her disappearance had gutted the town, and Marcus had been at the center of the search efforts. He'd coordinated volunteers, printed flyers, set up tip lines. He'd prayed publicly for her return every Sunday for a year. Darren felt sick. "Let's go," he said, pushing off the cruiser. "I need to talk to the DA before we do this. Make sure the warrant's airtight." At 2:30 that afternoon, Darren and Amara pulled into the parking lot of Willow Creek Baptist Church. The white clapboard building sat at the top of a hill, surrounded by old oaks and a cemetery that dated back to the 1800s. The church bell tower cast a long shadow across the gravestones. Darren could see Marcus's truck parked near the side entrance, a blue Ford F-150 with a volunteer fire department sticker on the back window. Marcus had been a volunteer firefighter for over a decade. He was beloved, trusted, the kind of man people called when they needed help moving furniture or fixing a leaky roof. Darren's hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. "You sure you want to do this?" Amara asked. "I can take lead if you need me to." Darren shook his head. "No, this is on me." They walked across the gravel lot, their boots crunching loud in the stillness. Inside, the church smelled like old hymnals and lemon polish. The hallway leading to the Bible study room was lined with framed photos of baptisms, mission trips, summer camps. Darren saw Natalie in one of them. Standing with a group of teenagers, her arm around a younger girl, her smile wide and genuine. He forced himself to keep walking. The door to the study room was open. Inside, Marcus sat at a long table with 5 other people, 3 men and 2 women, all in their 50s or 60s. They were reading from books, heads bowed, voices murmuring. Marcus looked up when Darren appeared in the doorway. "Darren," Marcus said, his face lighting up with a smile. "Good to see you. We're just finishing up. Want to join us for coffee?" Darren didn't smile back. "Marcus, I need you to come with me." The room went silent. The others looked up, confused. Marcus's smile faltered. "Is everything okay?" Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Darren stepped inside, Amara close behind him. "Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for the murder of Natalie Howard." The words hung in the air like smoke. One of the women gasped. Marcus's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the words. "What?" he whispered. "Darren, what are you talking about?" "You have the right to remain silent," Darren continued, his voice steady even though his hands were shaking. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "This is insane," Marcus said, standing up so fast his chair scraped across the floor. "I didn't, Darren, you know me. I would never." "You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." "Darren, please." Amara stepped forward with the handcuffs. Marcus stared at them, his eyes filling with tears. "I didn't do this," he said, his voice breaking. "I loved Natalie. She was like family to me." Darren didn't respond. He couldn't. He watched as Amara cuffed Marcus's wrists and led him toward the door. The people in the room were frozen, their faces masks of shock and disbelief. As they walked Marcus out to the cruiser, Darren saw curtains moving in the houses across the street. Phones were already being pulled out. By tonight, the whole town would know. And Ellen Howard would have to relive the worst day of her life all over again. By the time they reached the station, a small crowd had already gathered outside. News traveled fast in Willow Creek. Darren saw familiar faces, people he'd known his entire life, staring through the glass doors with expressions ranging from confusion to outrage. Marcus said nothing as they processed him. He sat in the interrogation room with his hands folded on the table, his eyes red but dry. Darren watched him through the two-way mirror, searching for some sign of guilt, some crack in the facade. But Marcus just looked lost. "He's not talking," Amara said, coming up beside Darren. "Lawyered up immediately." "Smart," Darren muttered. "Do you believe him?" Darren turned to look at her. "Does it matter what I believe? The DNA doesn't lie. DNA tells us he touched the scarf. It doesn't tell us he killed her. Then why did he lie about ever being near Miller's Bend? We asked him specifically in 2011 if he'd been to that area. He said no. Now we know that's not true." Amara was quiet. Darren knew she was playing devil's advocate, trying to keep him grounded. But it didn't help. He felt like he was drowning. His phone buzzed. It was a text from his wife, Caroline. "Ellen just called me. She's hysterical. Should I go over there?" Darren closed his eyes. "Yes, please. I'll be there as soon as I can." He pocketed his phone and headed for the door. "I'm going to see Ellen. Keep an eye on Webb. If he says anything at all, I want to know immediately." The drive to Ellen Howard's house took 12 minutes. She lived in a small yellow bungalow on Maple Street, the same house where Natalie had grown up. The porch light was on, and Caroline's car was already parked in the driveway. Darren knocked softly before letting himself in. Ellen was sitting on the couch, a tissue crumpled in her hand, her face blotchy and swollen. Caroline sat beside her, one arm around her shoulders. "Darren," Ellen said, her voice hoarse. "Is it true?" "Marcus." Darren nodded slowly. "We made the arrest an hour ago." Ellen let out a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a scream. "I don't understand. He was her friend. He helped us search for her. He prayed with me every single week for years. How could he?" "We don't have all the answers yet," Darren said gently. "But the DNA evidence is strong, Ellen. I wouldn't have arrested him if I wasn't sure." "Did he confess?" "No. He's denying everything." Ellen stood up abruptly, pacing across the small living room. "Where is she, Darren? If he killed her, where's her body? Did he tell you?" "He's not talking." "Make him talk." Ellen's voice cracked. "She's my daughter. I need to bury her. I need to know what happened." Darren felt his throat tighten. "I'm going to find out, Ellen. I promise you." But even as he said it, he wondered if it was a promise he could keep. Natalie Howard had been the kind of person who left light wherever she went. That's what people said at the vigils, at the memorials, in the quiet conversations that still happened 9 years later when her name came up. But Darren knew that remembering someone as full of light was easy when they were gone. The hard part was remembering the details, the small human things that made them real. He'd pulled Natalie's file from the archives the night after Marcus's arrest, spreading the contents across his kitchen table while Caroline slept upstairs. Photos, interview transcripts, timeline charts, maps with pins marking everywhere she'd been seen in the days before she vanished. He'd been a deputy back in 2011, not the sheriff, and he'd been assigned to canvass the neighborhood around Pinewood Trail. He remembered knocking on doors, asking the same questions over and over. "Did you see anything unusual? Did you hear anything? Did you know Natalie?" Most people had known her. She'd worked part-time at the library, shelving books and running the children's story hour every Saturday morning. She'd volunteered at the food bank. She'd sung in the church choir. Her life had been woven into the fabric of Willow Creek so tightly that her absence had felt like a tear in reality itself. Darren picked up a photo from the file. Natalie at her college graduation, cap and gown, holding her diploma, her mother standing beside her with tears streaming down her face. Ellen had been so proud. Natalie was the first person in their family to graduate from college. She'd worked 2 jobs to pay for it, waiting tables at the diner on Main Street and cleaning houses on weekends. She never complained, Ellen had told him during one of the early interviews. Not once. She'd come home exhausted, but she'd still help me with dinner, still ask about my day. She was the best person I've ever known. Darren had written it all down the way he'd been trained to, but he'd also felt it. The weight of those words, the way they turned Natalie from a case file into a daughter, a friend, a real human being who'd been stolen from the world. Now, staring at the photo, he wondered what Natalie would think if she knew it was Marcus who'd taken her. Would she have seen it coming? Had there been warning signs that everyone had missed? He flipped to the interview transcripts from 2011. Marcus had been interviewed twice, once as part of the general canvass of people who knew Natalie, and once specifically because he'd been one of the last people to see her alive. According to his statement, Natalie had attended the Wednesday night youth group meeting on November 2, 2011. She'd helped Marcus set up chairs and arrange snacks. They'd talked about her upcoming move to Knoxville, and Marcus had told her how proud he was of her. She'd left the church around 8:30 p.m., and Marcus said he'd stayed behind to lock up. "Did you see where she went?" the interviewer had asked. "No," Marcus had said. "I assumed she went home. She usually did." "Did she seem upset about anything? Worried?" "Not at all. She was excited. She kept talking about how she couldn't wait to start teaching." "Did anyone else see her leave?" "I don't think so. Most of the kids had already gone by then." Darren underlined that last part. Most of the kids had already gone. That meant Natalie and Marcus had been alone. Why hadn't anyone flagged that as suspicious at the time? Because Marcus Webb was above suspicion. That was why. The next morning, Darren drove to the church. He needed to retrace Natalie's last known steps, needed to see the building through fresh eyes now that everything had changed. Pastor Gregory Finch met him at the entrance. Gregory was in his 60s, silver-haired, with a gentle demeanor and a firm handshake. He looked exhausted. "Darren," he said, "I still can't believe it. Marcus, it doesn't make sense." "I know," Darren said, "but the evidence is what it is." Gregory led him inside, down the same hallway Darren had walked 2 days ago to arrest Marcus. They stopped at the door to the youth room. "This is where the meetings were held," Gregory said. "Marcus ran them every Wednesday night for, God, it must have been 10 years. Maybe more." Darren stepped inside. The room was bright, with posters on the walls about kindness and faith and community. There was a whiteboard in the corner with Bible verses written in Marcus's handwriting. A guitar leaned against the wall. Marcus played it during worship sessions. "Did Natalie come to these meetings regularly?" Darren asked. "Every week," Gregory said. "She was a mentor to the younger kids. They adored her." "Was there ever any tension between her and Marcus?" Gregory frowned. "Tension? No. They got along wonderfully. Marcus always spoke highly of her." Darren walked to the window. It overlooked the parking lot where Natalie's car had been found abandoned 9 years ago. No, wait, that wasn't right. Her car had been found at Pinewood Trail, not here. He turned back to Gregory. "After the meetings ended, where did people usually park?" "Right out there," Gregory said, pointing to the lot. "Why?" "Natalie's car was found at Pinewood Trail. That's 8 miles from here. How did it get there?" Gregory's face paled. I don't know. I never thought about that." Neither had anyone else, apparently. Darren made a note to pull traffic camera footage from that night, if any still existed. That afternoon, Darren sat down with Amara and 2 state investigators who'd been assigned to the case, Detective Luis Ramirez and Detective Karen Tompkins. They spread out in the conference room, surrounded by files, laptops, and coffee cups. "Let's talk about the scarf," Luis said. He was in his 40s, with sharp eyes and a reputation for being thorough. "It was found in Miller's Bend, 8 miles from where the car was abandoned. The DNA match puts Marcus at the scene. But here's the thing. There's no evidence Natalie was ever at Miller's Bend." "So how did the scarf get there?" Karen asked. She was younger than Luis, mid-30s, with short dark hair and a no-nonsense attitude. "Marcus put it there," Amara said. "He killed her somewhere else, tried to dispose of evidence, and the scarf ended up in the lake." "But where's the body?" Luis countered. "Miller's Bend has been searched multiple times over the years. Divers, cadaver dogs, sonar, nothing. If he dumped her there, we would have found her." Darren rubbed his temples. "So maybe he didn't dump her there. Maybe he just got rid of the scarf." "Why?" Karen asked. "Why keep the body but ditch the scarf?" The room went quiet. It was a good question, and Darren didn't have an answer. "We need to re-interview everyone who was at the church that night," Luis said finally. "Someone might remember something they didn't think was important back then." Darren nodded. "I'll pull the list." Over the next 3 days, Darren and his team re-interviewed 17 people who'd been at the youth group meeting on November 2nd, 2011. Most of them were now in their late 20s or early 30s, scattered across Tennessee and neighboring states. Some were reluctant to talk, still traumatized by Natalie's disappearance. Others were eager to help, desperate for closure. One name kept coming up: Emma Cartwright. She'd been 16 in 2011, one of the younger kids in the youth group. She was 25 now, living in Chattanooga, working as a nurse. Darren called her on a Thursday afternoon. She answered on the second ring. "Ms. Cartwright, this is Sheriff Darren Moss from Willow Creek. I'm calling about Natalie Howard." There was a long pause. Then, "I heard you arrested Marcus." "Yes, ma'am. I'm hoping you can help me with some questions about the night she disappeared. I already told the police everything I knew back then." "I understand. But sometimes people remember things later, things that didn't seem important at the time." Another pause. "Okay, what do you want to know? Do you remember seeing Natalie leave the church that night?" "No, I left early. My mom picked me up around 8. "Do you remember anything unusual about that night? Anything Marcus said or did?" Emma was quiet for so long that Darren thought she'd hung up. Then she said, very softly, "There was something." Darren's pulse quickened. What was it? Marcus. He gave Natalie a gift that night. A book. I saw him hand it to her when everyone was leaving. She looked surprised. What kind of book? I don't know. I didn't see the cover. But I remember thinking it was weird because it wasn't her birthday or anything. Darren wrote furiously. Did she say anything when he gave it to her? Not that I heard. But she put it in her purse. Emma, this is very important. Did you tell anyone about this back in 2011? No, she said. I didn't think it mattered. It was just a book. Darren thanked her and hung up. His hands were shaking. A gift. A book. Something personal. Something no one else had known about. He called Amara immediately. We need to find Natalie's purse. The purse had been logged into evidence in 2011, but after the case went cold, it had been transferred to long-term storage in a facility 30 miles outside Willow Creek. Darren and Amara drove out there on a gray Friday morning, the kind of day where the sky pressed down like a lid and the air tasted like rain. The storage facility was a converted warehouse, rows and rows of metal shelves stacked with cardboard boxes. A clerk led them to the section marked 2011 cold cases and helped them locate the box labeled Howard, Natalie, personal effects. Darren's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside was the purse, a brown leather crossbody bag with a long strap. He carefully removed each item: wallet, phone, dead battery, lip gloss, a pack of gum, receipts, a small notepad, keys. And there, at the bottom, was a book. It was slim, bound in dark green cloth, with gold lettering on the spine. The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. Darren turned it over in his hands. There was an inscription on the inside cover, written in neat handwriting. Natalie, for the journey ahead. You have so much light to give the world. Never forget that. With admiration and gratitude, Marcus. Darren felt his stomach turn. Amara leaned over his shoulder, reading the inscription. Admiration and gratitude, she said quietly. That's personal. Too personal, Darren agreed. He carefully bagged the book as evidence. We need to talk to Ellen. See if Natalie ever mentioned this. Ellen Howard's living room smelled like lavender and old photographs. She sat in the same spot on the couch where she'd been sitting the night Darren had told her about Marcus's arrest. Her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant. Ellen, Darren said gently, I need to show you something. He handed her a photograph of the book. Ellen stared at it, her brow furrowing. I don't remember ever seeing this, she said. But Natalie loved to read. She was always bringing home books from the library. This one was a gift, Darren said, from Marcus Webb. He gave it to her the night she disappeared. Ellen's face went pale. A gift? According to one of the youth group members, yes. Did Natalie ever mention Marcus giving her things? Gifts? Cards? Anything like that? Ellen shook her head slowly. No. I mean, sometimes he'd give the kids little things, candy, bookmarks, things like that. But I never thought it was strange. Did Natalie ever talk about Marcus outside of church activities? Sometimes. She'd mention funny things he said during meetings, or if he'd helped one of the kids with something. But she never said anything that made me think. Ellen's voice broke. Oh God, was he obsessed with her? We don't know yet, Darren said carefully, but we're looking into it. Over the next week, the investigation took on a new intensity. The state investigators dug into Marcus Webb's life with surgical precision. They pulled his phone records, his bank statements, his internet search history. They interviewed his wife, Linda, who sat in the interrogation room with her arms wrapped around herself, looking like she'd been hollowed out from the inside. I don't understand, Linda kept saying. He's a good man. He loves God. He loves this community. He would never. Mrs. Webb, Karen said gently. We need you to think carefully. Did your husband ever mention Natalie Howard in a way that seemed unusual? Linda's eyes filled with tears. He talked about her after she disappeared. He was devastated. We both were. But before that, no. She was just one of the kids in the youth group. Did he ever stay late at the church? Work on projects alone? Sometimes. He took his role seriously. He wanted to be there for the kids. Did he ever go to Miller's Bend? Linda hesitated. We used to go there for picnics. Years ago. But not recently. Not recently, Karen repeated. But he knew the area. Yes. That was the crack they'd been looking for. Luis Ramirez tracked down Marcus's phone records from November 2011. They showed that on the night Natalie disappeared, Marcus's phone had pinged off a cell tower near Miller's Bend at 9:47 p.m., more than an hour after he claimed he'd locked up the church and gone home. Darren stared at the report, his jaw tight. He lied. He went to Miller's Bend that night. And Natalie's phone? Amara asked. Last ping was at 8:52 p.m., near Pinewood Trail, Luis said. After that, nothing. Either the phone was turned off or the battery died. Or someone destroyed it, Darren said. They brought the phone records to the DA, a sharp-eyed woman named Victoria Brennan who'd been prosecuting cases in Tennessee for 20 years. She reviewed the documents, her expression unreadable. This is good, she said finally. This places him at the scene during the critical time window. Combined with the DNA on the scarf and the gift he gave her, we're building a strong circumstantial case. Circumstantial, Darren repeated. But not definitive. No body makes everything harder, Victoria admitted. But it's not impossible. We've won cases with less. We need more, Darren said. We need to find out what happened between the church and Miller's Bend. We need witnesses, evidence, something concrete. Victoria nodded. Then keep digging. The break came from an unexpected source. A woman named Ruth Alvarez, who lived in a farmhouse off Route 14, about halfway between Willow Creek and Miller's Bend, called the tip line. She'd seen the news coverage of Marcus's arrest and remembered something from November 2011. Darren drove out to meet her that same afternoon. Ruth was in her 70s, sharp-eyed and clear-voiced. She invited him into her kitchen, where a pot of coffee was already brewing. I didn't think it was important at the time, Ruth said, pouring 2 cups. But after I saw the news, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What did you see? Darren asked. It was late, maybe 10 o'clock. I'd gone out to check on the horses. One of them had been colicky earlier. And I saw a truck pull off Route 14, onto the access road that leads down to Miller's Bend. Darren's pulse quickened. Can you describe the truck? Blue, maybe a Ford. It had a sticker on the back window, but I couldn't see what it was from that distance. Did you see the driver? No, but I thought it was odd because that road doesn't really go anywhere. Just down to the lake. And it was cold that night. Nobody goes down there in November. Did you see the truck come back? Ruth nodded. About 40 minutes later, it came back up the access road and turned onto Route 14, heading back toward Willow Creek. Darren set down his coffee cup carefully. Mrs. Alvarez, would you be willing to testify to this in court? If it helps find out what happened to that poor girl, absolutely. Armed with Ruth's testimony, the team returned to Miller's Bend. This time, they brought ground-penetrating radar and a team of forensic anthropologists from the University of Tennessee. If Natalie's body was somewhere in the area, they were going to find it. The search took 3 days. They covered every inch of the woods surrounding the lake, mapping the terrain, looking for anomalies in the soil. On the 3rd day, one of the anthropologists called Darren over to a section of forest about 200 yards from the water's edge. We've got something, she said. Darren's heart pounded as he followed her to a small clearing where the radar had detected a disturbance in the ground. The team began to dig carefully, removing layers of soil and leaf litter. And then, 6 feet down, they found it. A shallow grave. And inside, wrapped in a plastic tarp, were human remains. Darren turned away, his hands shaking, his vision blurring. Amara put a hand on his shoulder. We need to confirm identity, she said quietly. It's her, Darren said. I know it is. The dental records came back 2 days later. The remains were positively identified as Natalie Howard. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the skull. Time of death. Consistent with November 2011. Ellen Howard collapsed when Darren told her. He caught her before she hit the floor, held her while she sobbed, her grief raw and endless. Caroline stayed with her that night and the next and the next. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath. Marcus Webb's arraignment was scheduled for the following Monday. The courtroom was packed. Standing room only, news crews lining the walls, people spilling out into the hallway. Darren sat in the front row, watching as Marcus was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. Marcus looked smaller somehow, diminished. His eyes scanned the crowd until they landed on Linda, who sat in the back row, her face pale and drawn. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but his lawyer touched his arm and he closed it again. The judge read the charges. First-degree murder. Marcus's lawyer entered a plea of not guilty. As Marcus was led back out, he turned and looked directly at Darren. And for just a moment, Darren saw something in his eyes. Not defiance, not anger, but something that looked almost like relief. The trial began on a cold morning in March 2021. The courthouse in Willow Creek had been built in 1923, all dark wood and high ceilings, and it creaked like a ship in a storm as people filled the seats. Ellen Howard sat in the front row every single day, her face a mask of composure that Darren knew cost her everything. Caroline sat beside her, a steady presence, while Darren took his place with the prosecution team. Victoria Brennan opened with precision. She laid out the timeline, the evidence, the phone records. She called Ruth Alvarez to the stand, and the elderly woman described the blue truck she'd seen that night, the way it had turned down the access road to Miller's Bend at 10 o'clock and returned 40 minutes later. "And you're certain of the time?" Victoria asked. "Absolutely," Ruth said. "I looked at the clock when I came back inside. It was 10:43. The defense attorney, a man named Richard Paulson with silver hair and expensive suits, cross-examined gently. "Mrs. Alvarez, you said you couldn't see the driver. Is that correct?" "That's right." "And you couldn't see the license plate?" "No." "So you can't say with certainty that it was Mr. Webb's truck?" "No," Ruth admitted. "But it looked like his truck." Paulson nodded, satisfied. No further questions. The forensic evidence came next. The DNA analyst took the stand and explained how Marcus's skin cells had been found on Natalie's scarf, cells that were consistent with prolonged contact, not just a casual touch. "Could these cells have been transferred innocently?" Victoria asked. "It's possible," the analyst said. "But given the quantity and location of the cells, prolonged direct contact is the most likely explanation." Then came the phone records. Luis Ramirez testified about the cell tower pings, showing the jury a map with color-coded dots marking Marcus's movements that night. Church, then Route 14, then Miller's Bend. And Mr. Webb initially told police he went straight home after locking up the church. "Is that correct?" Victoria asked. "Yes," Luis said. "He didn't mention Miller's Bend until we confronted him with the phone records during his arrest." "And what did he say when you confronted him?" "He said he couldn't remember." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Paulson objected, arguing that Marcus's post-arrest statements weren't admissible, but the judge overruled him. The most difficult testimony came from the forensic anthropologist who'd overseen the excavation at Miller's Bend. Dr. Sarah Chun was a small woman with wire-rimmed glasses and a calm demeanor. She explained how they'd used ground-penetrating radar to locate the grave, how they'd carefully excavated the remains, how they'd determined cause of death. "The victim sustained a severe fracture to the left parietal bone," Dr. Chun said, pointing to a diagram of a human skull. "This injury would have been immediately fatal." "What could cause such an injury?" Victoria asked. "Blunt force trauma. A blow from a heavy object. A rock, a piece of wood, something similar." "Was there any indication that the victim fought back?" "Yes, there were defensive fractures on the ulna of the left arm, consistent with the victim raising her arm to protect herself." Darren watched Ellen's face crumple. Caroline put an arm around her, and Ellen buried her face in Caroline's shoulder, her body shaking with silent sobs. Victoria let the moment breathe before continuing. Dr. Chun, based on your examination, can you determine how long after death the body was buried? Based on the condition of the remains and the surrounding soil, burial occurred within hours of death, possibly less. And the location, was it chosen deliberately? In my professional opinion, yes. The grave was deep enough to prevent discovery by animals, and the location was remote. Someone familiar with the area would have known it was unlikely to be found. Paulson's cross-examination was brief. He couldn't dispute the science, so he focused on creating doubt. Dr. Chun, you can't tell us who buried the body, can you? No. And you can't tell us who struck the fatal blow? No. So despite your expertise, you can't definitively connect my client to this crime, can you? Dr. Chun adjusted her glasses. I can tell you what happened to Natalie Howard. Who is responsible for that, that's for the jury to decide. The prosecution rested after 5 days of testimony. Paulson's defense strategy became clear immediately. Create an alternative narrative. He called witnesses who testified to Marcus's character. His years of volunteer work, his dedication to the church, his spotless record. He brought in a digital forensics expert who suggested that phone records could be unreliable, that tower pings didn't always indicate exact location. And then he called Marcus to the stand. The courtroom went silent as Marcus walked to the witness box. He'd lost weight during the months in jail, his face gaunt, his eyes hollow. He placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Paulson started gently. Marcus, how long have you lived in Willow Creek? My whole life. 47 years. And how long have you been involved with Willow Creek Baptist Church? Since I was a child. I've been leading the youth group for 12 years. Why did you do that? Lead the youth group. Marcus's voice was soft. Because I believe in giving back. I had mentors when I was young who changed my life. I wanted to do the same for others. Did you know Natalie Howard? Yes, she was a wonderful person. She helped with the youth group for about 3 years. How would you describe your relationship with her? Professional. Friendly. She was like a younger sister to me. Did you ever have romantic feelings for Natalie? Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Absolutely not. I'm married. I love my wife. Natalie was a young woman I was proud to mentor. Paulson nodded. Let's talk about November 2nd, 2011. You've heard testimony that you were the last person to see Natalie alive. Is that true? As far as I know, yes. She helped me clean up after youth group that night. We talked for a few minutes and then she left. I locked up and went home. Did you give her a book that night? Marcus hesitated, then nodded. Yes, The Road Less Traveled. It's a book about personal growth and finding your path. She was about to start a new chapter in her life, and I thought it might help her. Was that unusual? Giving gifts to the youth group members? No. I gave books to several of the kids over the years. I believe in reading, in education. Did you have any inappropriate feelings toward Natalie when you gave her that book? No, Marcus said firmly. None. Paulson let that sit. Then, the prosecution has presented phone records showing your phone near Miller's Bend that night. Were you at Miller's Bend? This was the moment. Darren leaned forward. Marcus closed his eyes. Yes, I was. The courtroom erupted. The judge banged his gavel. Order. Order in the court. When the noise subsided, Paulson continued. Why were you there? Because Natalie called me, Marcus said, his voice breaking. About an hour after she left the church. She said her car had broken down near Pinewood Trail. She was scared. She asked me to come help her. Darren felt his heart stop. This was new. Marcus had never mentioned a phone call. Why didn't you tell the police this in 2011? Paulson asked. Because I panicked, Marcus said, tears streaming down his face. When they started asking me questions, when I realized Natalie was missing, I was terrified they'd think I was involved. So I lied. I said I went straight home. It was the biggest mistake of my life. What happened when you got to Pinewood Trail? Her car was there, But she wasn't. I looked around for maybe 15 minutes, calling her name. Then I drove to Miller's Bend because I thought maybe she'd walk there looking for help. There's a house on that road, the Alvarez place. But I didn't find her. So I went home. Why didn't you report that she was missing? Because I thought she'd gotten a ride from someone else. I thought she was safe. When I heard the next morning that she was missing, I couldn't believe it. And by then, I'd already lied to the police. I was trapped. Did you kill Natalie Howard? No, Marcus said, looking directly at the jury. I did not. I loved that girl like family. I would never have hurt her. Victoria's cross-examination was brutal. She paced in front of the witness stand like a predator circling prey. Mr. Webb, you claim Natalie called you. Why is there no record of that call? I don't know, Marcus said. Maybe she used someone else's phone. Someone else's phone, Victoria repeated. How convenient. Mr. Webb, your phone records show 17 calls that night. None of them were from Natalie's number. None of them were from unknown numbers. So where's this mystery call? I'm telling you what happened, Marcus insisted. You're telling us a story, Victoria countered. A story you've had 9 years to invent. Mr. Webb, you gave Natalie a book with an inscription that reads, "You have so much light to give the world." That's not something you write to someone you view as a younger sister. That's something you write to someone you're infatuated with. That's not true. You lied to police about going to Miller's Bend. You lied about the phone call. You lied about your relationship with Natalie. Why should this jury believe anything you say? Because I'm telling the truth now, Marcus said desperately. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I didn't kill her. Victoria walked to the prosecution table and picked up an evidence bag containing the scarf. Your DNA was found on this scarf. Not just a trace amount. Substantial contact. How did that happen if you never saw Natalie after she left the church? Marcus stared at the scarf. I don't know. Maybe she was wearing it when we hugged goodbye that night. Maybe I touched it when I was helping her with something. Maybe, Victoria said. You have a lot of maybes, Mr. Webb, but what we have are facts. Your DNA on her scarf, your phone at the burial site, your lies to investigators, and Natalie Howard's body in a shallow grave in a location you knew intimately. I didn't do this, Marcus whispered. Victoria leaned in close. Then who did? Marcus had no answer. The jury deliberated for 4 days. During that time, Willow Creek held its breath. Darren barely slept. He kept replaying Marcus's testimony in his mind, looking for cracks, looking for truth. Part of him, a small, stubborn part, wanted to believe that Marcus was telling the truth, that there was some explanation for all of it that didn't make a man Darren had trusted a murderer. But the evidence didn't lie. And when the jury came back with a verdict, Darren knew what it would be before the foreman opened his mouth. We the jury find the defendant, Marcus Webb, guilty of murder in the first degree. The courtroom exploded. Ellen let out a sound that was part sob, part scream. Marcus's face crumbled. Linda Webb ran from the courtroom, her hand over her mouth. News crews scrambled. The judge banged his gavel, but order was impossible. Darren sat frozen, watching Marcus being led away in handcuffs. Marcus looked back once, his eyes finding Darren's. And in that moment Darren saw not guilt or innocence but something more complicated. Grief, resignation, and something that looked like peace. The sentencing hearing was 2 weeks later. Ellen was given the opportunity to read a victim impact statement. She stood at the podium, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Natalie was my only child, she said. She was my whole world. Every morning for 9 years. I woke up not knowing if she was alive or dead. Now I know she's gone, and it doesn't hurt any less. But at least I can bury her. At least I can say goodbye. She turned to look at Marcus. You stole my daughter from me. You stole her future, her dreams, everything she could have been. I want you to know that I will never forgive you. Never. The judge sentenced Marcus to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiff led Marcus away, Pastor Gregory stood up in the gallery. His voice rang out, clear and strong. May God have mercy on your soul, Marcus. Because we cannot. The week after the sentencing, Darren drove out to the cemetery where Natalie Howard would finally be laid to rest. The funeral had been delayed for months, first by the trial, then by the family's need for time, then by the simple logistics of planning a memorial that could hold all the grief Willow Creek had been carrying for nearly a decade. The headstone was simple, gray granite with her name, her dates, and a single line beneath, "Her light still shines." Ellen had chosen those words. She told Darren that she wanted Natalie to be remembered not for how she died but for how she lived, with kindness, with purpose, with a generosity of spirit that had touched everyone who knew her. The funeral drew hundreds of people. Former students Natalie had mentored, co-workers from the library, people from the church, though attendance there had dropped dramatically since Marcus's arrest. Pastor Gregory delivered the eulogy, his voice heavy with emotion. "We gather here today not just to mourn," he said, "but to celebrate a life that mattered." Natalie believed in the power of small kindnesses. She believed that every person had value, that every child deserved to be seen and heard. She lived that belief every single day. He paused, looking out at the crowd. "Many of you are angry. Many of you are hurting. Some of you feel betrayed by this community, by the church, by God himself. Those feelings are valid. What happened to Natalie was an act of evil, and evil is hardest to bear when it comes from a place we believed was safe." Darren stood at the back of the crowd, his arm around Caroline, watching Ellen's shoulders shake as she wept. He thought about all the ways this case had changed him, how it had taken his trust in people and ground it down to nothing, how it had made him question every interaction, every smile, every handshake, how it had shown him that monsters didn't always look like monsters. In the weeks that followed, Willow Creek began the slow process of healing. The church held community meetings to discuss what had happened, how warning signs might have been missed, how to rebuild trust. Some people stopped attending services altogether. Others doubled down on their faith, clinging to it like a lifeline in turbulent water. Linda Webb left town. She sold the house she'd shared with Marcus, packed up her life in 3 days, and disappeared. Rumors said she'd moved to her sister's place in North Carolina. Darren didn't blame her. She'd lost her husband to a crime she never saw coming, her reputation to gossip she couldn't control. Staying in Willow Creek would have been impossible. The youth group at the church disbanded. Parents were too afraid to send their children, too traumatized by the betrayal of trust. Pastor Gregory tried to restart it with new leadership, but attendance was sparse. Eventually, he let it go. "Maybe that's okay," he told Darren over coffee one morning. "Maybe some things need to end so new things can begin." Emma Cartwright, the young woman who'd remembered Marcus giving Natalie the book, reached out to Darren 6 months after the trial. She wanted to start a foundation in Natalie's name, something that would provide scholarships for young women pursuing careers in education. "Natalie wanted to be a teacher," Emma said when she pitched the idea to Ellen. "She wanted to help kids learn and grow. We should honor that." Ellen was hesitant at first. The grief was still too raw, the wound too fresh. But Caroline encouraged her, and slowly, Ellen began to see the value in it. By the end of the year, the Natalie Howard Memorial Scholarship Fund was established. The first recipient was a girl from Willow Creek who wanted to study early childhood education at the same community college Natalie had attended. At the award ceremony, Ellen stood at the podium with a photo of Natalie beside her. "My daughter believed in possibility," she said. "She believed that every child deserved a chance to succeed. This scholarship is my way of keeping that belief alive." The audience rose in applause. Darren, sitting in the third row, felt tears stream down his face. For the first time since this nightmare began, he felt something other than anger and grief. He felt hope. The case had repercussions beyond Willow Creek. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation launched a review of cold cases across the state, looking for similar patterns, trusted community members, long investigations, DNA evidence that had been overlooked. Darren was asked to consult on 3 of them, sharing what he'd learned about the importance of re-interviewing witnesses, about not dismissing evidence just because it pointed to someone above suspicion. People trust authority figures, He told a room of law enforcement officers at a training conference in Nashville. Teachers, coaches, clergy, first responders. We're taught from childhood to respect these people, to believe they have our best interests at heart. That's why cases like Natalie Howard's are so hard to solve. We don't want to believe that someone we admire could be capable of evil. He clicked to the next slide. A photo of Marcus at a church picnic, smiling, surrounded by kids. But evil doesn't always look like a stranger in a dark alley. Sometimes it looks like your neighbor. Sometimes it looks like your friend. 2 years after the trial, Darren received a letter from Marcus Webb. It arrived at the sheriff's office in a plain white envelope, forwarded from the state prison. Darren stared at it for a long time before opening it. The letter was handwritten, Marcus's neat script covering 3 pages. Dear Darren, I'm writing this knowing you probably won't read it, or if you do, you won't believe a word. But I need to say it anyway, for my own soul if nothing else. I didn't kill Natalie Howard. I know what the evidence says. I know what the jury decided. I know how it looks, the DNA, the phone records, the lies I told. I've spent every day for the past 2 years trying to understand how I ended up here. And the only answer I have is that God works in ways I'll never comprehend. I did lie to the police. I panicked when they started asking questions, and I made choices that destroyed any chance I had at justice. That's on me. But I swear to you, Darren, I never touched Natalie. I never hurt her. I don't know how my DNA got on that scarf, or why my phone pinged near Miller's Bend, or who actually killed her. All I know is that it wasn't me. I'm not asking you to reopen the case. I'm not asking for clemency or sympathy. I'm just asking you to know that somewhere, the person who killed Natalie is still out there. And Willow Creek might not be as safe as everyone thinks. Tell Ellen I'm sorry. Not for killing her daughter, I didn't do that, but for failing to protect her. That's what haunts me most. I was supposed to be a shepherd, and I let a wolf into the flock. May God bless you and keep you, Marcus Webb. Darren read the letter 3 times, then put it in a drawer and tried to forget about it. But he couldn't. Late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, he'd take it out and read it again, searching for something. Truth, deception, a crack in the facade. He never found one. 5 years after Natalie's death, Ellen Howard stood at the Willow Creek Community Center for the dedication of the Natalie Howard Memorial Garden. It was a small space behind the library, filled with flowers and benches and a stone fountain. A plaque near the entrance read, "In memory of Natalie Howard, who believed every person deserved kindness. May this garden be a place of peace and reflection." Ellen ran her fingers over the words, tears sliding down her cheeks. "She would have loved this," she whispered. Darren stood beside her, his hair grayer now, his face lined with years of difficult cases and sleepless nights. "She would have," he agreed. "Do you ever doubt it?" Ellen asked suddenly. "That Marcus did it?" Darren was quiet for a long moment. "I used to," he said finally, "right after the letter. But then I'd look at the evidence again, and it always came back to the same conclusion. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. And if it's not, then God help us all." Ellen nodded, accepting the ambiguity because she had no choice. Certainty was a luxury she'd lost the night Natalie disappeared. The scholarship fund grew. By 2026, it had awarded 15 scholarships to young women across Tennessee. 3 of them had already graduated and become teachers, carrying Natalie's legacy into classrooms where her name would never be spoken, but her spirit would be felt. The church rebuilt its youth program under new leadership, with strict oversight and background checks and policies designed to prevent what had happened with Marcus. Trust was earned slowly, cautiously, but it was earned. And Willow Creek learned to live with the scar. The story of Natalie Howard became a cautionary tale, a reminder that evil could hide in plain sight, that vigilance was necessary even in places that felt safe. But it also became a story of resilience, of a mother who refused to let her daughter be forgotten, of a community that stumbled, fell, and found the strength to stand back up. Darren retired from the sheriff's department in 2027, passing the badge to Amara Chun, who'd earned it through years of dedicated service. On his last day, he drove out to the memorial garden and sat on one of the benches, watching the fountain trickle water over smooth stones. He thought about Natalie, about Marcus, about all the questions that would never have satisfactory answers. He thought about justice and mercy and the space between them where most of us live. And then he stood up, walked to his truck, and drove home to Caroline, ready to begin the next chapter of his life. The Natalie Howard Memorial Scholarship Ceremony had become an annual tradition in Willow Creek, held every November on the weekend closest to the anniversary of her disappearance. Ellen Howard, now 72, sat in the front row of the community center, her hair silver, her face softened by time but still bearing the weight of her loss. This year's recipient was a girl named Sophia Martinez, 18 years old, first-generation college student, determined to become a special education teacher. Sophia stood at the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she held her acceptance speech. "I never met Natalie Howard," Sophia said, "but I feel like I know her through the stories people tell, through the kindness this scholarship represents. My mother works 2 jobs to support our family, and without this funding, college would have been impossible for me. So I want to say thank you to Natalie's memory, to Mrs. Howard, and to everyone who believes that education can change lives." The audience applauded. Ellen wiped her eyes, smiling through tears. Beside her sat Emma Cartwright, now 35, married with 2 children, still the driving force behind the foundation. "Natalie would be so proud," Emma whispered. "She would," Ellen agreed. After the ceremony, Ellen walked through the memorial garden. It had grown over the years, more flowers, more benches, a section of native plants that attracted butterflies and hummingbirds. It was a living place, full of movement and color, exactly what Natalie would have wanted. A young woman approached her, maybe 25, with dark hair and cautious eyes. "Mrs. Howard?" Ellen turned. "Yes. My name is Rachel. I was in the youth group with Natalie. I wanted to tell you that I think about her all the time. She was the first person who ever made me feel like I mattered." Ellen's throat tightened. "Thank you for telling me that. I'm a teacher now," Rachel continued, 2nd grade. "And every day, I try to be for my students what Natalie was for me." After Rachel left, Ellen sat on a bench and let herself cry. Not from grief this time, but from gratitude. Natalie's light was still shining, reflected in the lives she'd touched, multiplied through the students who'd been inspired by her memory. 5 years later, 2035. Amara Chun stood in the cold case unit of the Willow Creek Sheriff's Department, surrounded by file boxes and evidence logs. She'd been sheriff for 8 years now, and she'd made it her mission to ensure that cases like Natalie Howard's didn't go cold again. Her deputy, a sharp young man named Jordan Price, knocked on the doorframe. "Sheriff? Got something you need to see." Amara looked up. "What is it?" "New DNA technology. The state crime lab is offering to retest evidence from old cases. They can detect trace amounts that weren't possible to analyze before." Amara's pulse quickened. "And I was thinking about the Howard case. The scarf. What if we could find DNA from someone other than Marcus Webb?" Amara was quiet for a long moment. The case was closed. Marcus had been in prison for 14 years. Reopening it would mean questions, doubt, potentially appending everything. But it would also mean truth, whatever that truth might be. "Submit the request," she said. "Let's see what they find." 10 years later, 2040. The results came back on a Tuesday afternoon. Amara sat in her office, staring at the report, her hands shaking. There was a second DNA profile on the scarf. Male. Unknown. Not in any database. She called the state crime lab. "Are you certain about this?" "Absolutely," the analyst said. "The sample was small, but it's definitely there. And it's not Marcus Webb's." Amara hung up and sat in silence for a long time. Then she pulled Marcus Webb's prison file and made a call to the Tennessee Department of Corrections. Marcus Webb walked into the visiting room at the state prison looking older, grayer, but somehow more at peace than Amara expected. He sat down across from her, his hands folded on the table. "Sheriff Chen," he said, "I was surprised to get your call. Mr. Webb, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "I've never been anything but honest," Marcus said. Even when the truth made me look guilty. Amara slid a folder across the table. We retested the scarf. We found DNA from another person. Someone who's not in any database. Do you have any idea who that could be? Marcus's face went pale. He opened the folder, staring at the report. I don't know, he whispered. I've been saying for 14 years that I didn't kill Natalie. Maybe now someone will finally believe me. Who else was at the church that night? Amara asked. Think carefully. Anyone who might have had access to Natalie. Marcus closed his eyes, thinking. There was a janitor. New guy. Started maybe a month before Natalie disappeared. He was always around, always watching. I remember thinking it was strange, but I never said anything because I didn't want to seem paranoid. Do you remember his name? David something. David, Thompson, Thomas? I can't remember. Amara made notes. What did he look like? Average height, brown hair, maybe mid-30s. Quiet, kept to himself. Did he interact with Natalie? I don't know. Maybe. She was friendly with everyone. Amara left the prison with more questions than answers. She spent the next 6 months tracking down employment records from Willow Creek Baptist Church, trying to find any trace of a janitor named David. She found nothing. It was like he'd never existed. 15 years later, 2045. Ellen Howard passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87. She'd lived to see 25 young women receive scholarships in Natalie's name. She'd lived to see the memorial garden become a place of healing for the entire community. She'd lived long enough to find peace, if not closure. At her funeral, Emma Cartwright delivered the eulogy. Ellen never gave up, she said. Even when the grief was unbearable, even when the questions had no answers, she kept Natalie's memory alive through acts of love and generosity. That's the legacy she leaves us. Amara attended the funeral, sitting in the back, still carrying the weight of that unknown DNA profile. She'd never found David, never identified the second person whose genetic material had been on that scarf. The case remained technically open, though Marcus Webb stayed in prison, his conviction still standing. Sometimes justice was complicated. Sometimes the truth was elusive. Sometimes you had to live with ambiguity. 20 years later, 2050. Sophia Martinez stood in her classroom at Willow Creek Elementary School, watching her third-grade students work on a group project about community heroes. One group had chosen to research Natalie Howard, using materials from the library and interviews with older residents. Miss Martinez? A girl named Lily asked. Did you know Natalie Howard? I never met her, Sophia said. But I received a scholarship in her name that made it possible for me to become a teacher. In a way, she's the reason I'm here with all of you. What happened to her? Another student asked. Sophia chose her words carefully. Something very sad. But her family and this community chose to honor her by helping other people pursue their dreams. That's how we keep someone's light shining, by passing it on. After school, Sophia walked through the memorial garden. It had been expanded again, now covering nearly an acre, with walking paths and a playground. Children laughed and played, their joy a living tribute to a woman who'd believed every child deserved kindness. Sophia sat on one of the original benches, the plaque still readable after all these years. Her light still shines, and it did, in scholarship recipients who became teachers, in community programs that supported young women, in a town that had learned that healing was possible even after devastating loss. Natalie Howard had been gone for 39 years, but her impact rippled outward still, touching lives she'd never met, shaping a future she'd never see. That was the thing about light. You couldn't kill it. You could only reflect it, magnify it, pass it on. And that's exactly what Willow Creek had done. Marcus Webb died in prison in 2048, maintaining his innocence to the end. The unknown DNA profile was never identified. The full truth of what happened on November 2, 2011, remained a mystery, a reminder that some questions don't have tidy answers, that justice is imperfect, that we do the best we can with the information we have. But the story of Natalie Howard transcended the circumstances of her death. It became a story about resilience, about community, about choosing hope over despair and action over paralysis. The documentary filmmaker adjusted her camera, focusing on the weathered face of Amara Chan, now 73 and long retired from her position as sheriff. They sat in Amara's living room, surrounded by framed commendations and photographs from her decades in law enforcement. "Tell me about the moment you discovered the second DNA profile," the filmmaker, a woman named Jordan Way, asked. Amara's eyes grew distant. It was 2035, 15 years after Marcus Webb's conviction. The technology had advanced so much that we could detect genetic material we'd never seen before. And there it was, proof that someone else had handled that scarf. Someone whose identity we never discovered. Did that change your opinion about Marcus Webb's guilt? Amara was quiet for a long moment. It complicated things. The evidence against Marcus was strong. His lies, his presence at Miller's Bend, his DNA on the scarf. But this second profile opened a door we thought was closed. The truth is, I don't know what happened that night. I don't know if Marcus killed Natalie alone, if he had help, or if someone else entirely was responsible and Marcus just made catastrophically bad decisions that made him look guilty. The case remains officially unsolved in terms of that second DNA profile. Yes, and that haunts me. It means somewhere out there, someone knows what really happened. And they've kept that secret for 44 years. Jordan turned off the camera. "Do you think we'll ever know the full truth?" "I used to think truth always came out eventually," Amara said. "But I've learned that some secrets die with the people who keep them. All we can do is honor the victims by remembering them and working to prevent similar tragedies." The documentary, titled The Light That Remains, the Natalie Howard story, premiered at the Nashville Film Festival in 2056. It was a comprehensive look at the case, featuring interviews with investigators, family members, community leaders, and scholars who studied cold cases and wrongful convictions. The response was immediate and intense. True crime enthusiasts dissected every detail. Legal experts debated whether the second DNA profile was grounds for exoneration. Civil rights advocates pointed to the case as an example of how circumstantial evidence could lead to potential miscarriages of justice. But the documentary did something else, something more important. It showed the full scope of Natalie's life beyond her death. It featured footage of scholarship recipients who'd gone on to become teachers, principals, counselors. It showed the memorial garden in all its mature beauty, now a registered historical site. It revealed how one young woman's commitment to kindness had created a legacy that outlived her by decades. Rachel Mendez, the former youth group member who'd become a teacher, appeared in the documentary's final segment. She was now 60 years old, a school principal with grandchildren of her own. "Natalie taught me that small acts of kindness matter," Rachel said, her voice thick with emotion. "That showing up for people, seeing them, validating them, that changes lives. I've tried to live that way every day since I met her. And I've taught my children and my students to do the same. That's Natalie's real legacy. Not how she died, but how she lived." 30 years later, 2060. The Willow Creek Historical Society opened a permanent exhibit about Natalie Howard and the impact of her Memorial Scholarship Fund. The exhibit included photographs from her childhood, her college years, her volunteer work. It displayed the original flyers from the search efforts in 2011. It showed the evolution of the Memorial Garden from a small plot to a sprawling community space. But the centerpiece was an interactive digital archive where visitors could read letters from scholarship recipients, hundreds of them now, spanning 3 decades. Each letter told a story of a life changed, a dream realized, an opportunity seized. "I was a single mother working minimum wage when I received the Natalie Howard Scholarship," read one letter from 2042. "It allowed me to finish my teaching degree. Now I work with at-risk youth, trying to be for them what Natalie was for so many, a person who believes in their potential. Growing up poor and brown in rural Tennessee, I never thought college was possible for me," read another from 2051. "The scholarship didn't just pay for school. Told me I was worth investing in. Now I teach high school English, and I make sure every student knows they matter." Maya Rodriguez, the current director of the Natalie Howard Memorial Foundation, gave tours of the exhibit to school groups. She was 38, a former scholarship recipient herself, who'd earned her doctorate in education and dedicated her career to expanding the foundation's reach. This isn't just about one person, Maya told a group of high school students. It's about what happens when a community decides that tragedy won't have the final word. Natalie Howard died in 2011, but her impact grows stronger every year. That's the power of intentional remembrance. That's the power of choosing to honor someone by living out their values. One student raised her hand. Do you think they got the right person? The guy who was convicted? Maya considered the question carefully. I think the criminal justice system did the best it could with the evidence available. But I also know that cases are complicated, truth is sometimes elusive, and we may never have complete certainty about everything that happened that night. What I do know is that focusing solely on the crime and the perpetrator means the victim becomes defined only by their death. Natalie was so much more than what happened to her. She was a dreamer, a friend, a mentor, a light. That's what we choose to remember. 35 years later, 2065, a genetic genealogy breakthrough led to a stunning development. Using the second DNA profile from Natalie's scarf, investigators employed the same techniques that had solved the Golden State Killer case decades earlier. They uploaded the profile to public genealogy databases and began building a family tree. It took 18 months, but they finally identified the source. A man named David Pritchard, who died in a car accident in 2019, 8 years after Natalie's murder, 1 year before Marcus Webb's arrest. The revelation sent shockwaves through Willow Creek and the true crime community. Investigators dug into Pritchard's background and discovered he'd worked briefly as a contract cleaner at Willow Creek Baptist Church in October and November 2011. Exactly as Marcus had remembered. He'd been hired through a temp agency and had left the job abruptly in mid-November, shortly after Natalie's disappearance. Further investigation revealed Pritchard had a history of stalking and harassment in 2 other states, charges that had been pleaded down to misdemeanors. He'd moved frequently, never staying in one place long enough to establish a pattern that investigators could track. The Innocence Project took up Marcus Webb's case posthumously, seeking to have his conviction vacated. The legal battle was complex. Marcus's DNA was still on the scarf, he had still lied to police, he had still been at Miller's Bend that night. But the presence of Pritchard's DNA suggested a different narrative. That Pritchard might have been the primary perpetrator, and Marcus's involvement, while suspicious, might not have constituted murder. In 2067, 56 years after Natalie's death, a judge vacated Marcus Webb's conviction. The ruling stated that the new evidence, while not definitively proving Marcus's innocence, created reasonable doubt about his sole culpability and would likely have resulted in a different verdict had it been available at trial. Marcus had been dead for 19 years. He never knew he'd be exonerated. Linda Webb, now 92 and living in a nursing home in North Carolina, released a brief statement. My husband maintained his innocence until his final breath. While this ruling comes too late for him, I hope it brings some measure of peace to everyone who loved him and believed in him. And I hope it brings Ellen Howard's family the closure they deserve, knowing that the full truth has finally emerged. Ellen Howard had been dead for 22 years by then, having passed away never knowing about Pritchard's involvement. Her daughter's murder had defined her life, but so had her response to it. The scholarships, the garden, the choice to transform grief into generosity. The Historical Society updated the exhibit to include the new information. The narrative became more complex, more nuanced. Marcus Webb's section was revised to acknowledge the exoneration while not erasing the initial conviction. Pritchard's photo was added, along with information about his criminal history and connection to the case. This is what real history looks like, Maya Rodriguez told a reporter. Messy, complicated, full of questions that take decades to answer, and some that never get answered at all. But through it all, Natalie Howard's legacy remains clear. She was a person who believed in kindness, who invested in others, who made the world better. That truth doesn't change regardless of who killed her or how the legal case evolved. 40 years later, 2070. On the 60th anniversary of Natalie's death, Willow Creek held a community-wide day of remembrance. The Memorial Garden, now a sprawling 10-acre park, hosted hundreds of people. 3 generations of scholarship recipients attended. Teachers, counselors, social workers, nonprofit directors, all whose lives had been changed by Natalie's legacy. Sophia Martinez, now 88 years old and using a cane, stood at the podium where she'd given her acceptance speech 6 decades earlier. When I received the Natalie Howard Scholarship in 2030, I was 18 years old and terrified that I'd never achieve my dreams, she said, her voice still strong despite her age. That scholarship didn't just pay for college. Told me I was worthy. Told me someone believed in me. And it gave me a model for how to live with generosity, with purpose, with an unwavering belief in the potential of others. She paused, looking out at the crowd. Natalie Howard has been gone for 60 years. I never met her. Most of us here never met her. But we know her. We know her through the kindness that carries her name. We know her through the lives that have been changed because her mother, Ellen, chose love over bitterness. We know her through every teacher who walked into a classroom because a scholarship made it possible. We know her through every child who was seen, valued, and supported because their teacher learned from Natalie's example. The crowd rose in applause. In the front row, Maya Rodriguez's granddaughter, a college student studying education, wiped tears from her eyes. That evening, as the sun set over the memorial garden, a group of former scholarship recipients released 60 white balloons into the Tennessee sky, one for each year since Natalie's death. They rose slowly, catching the golden light, carrying with them the hopes and dreams of generations who'd been touched by one woman's commitment to kindness. And in that moment, standing in a garden that bloomed with life and possibility, it was impossible to say that darkness had won. Because Natalie Howard's light was still shining, reflected in thousands of lives, multiplied across decades, proving that love is stronger than death and legacy outlasts tragedy. I'll continue the story with an additional 2,000 words, focusing on new developments and deepening the narrative. 65 years later, 2076. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a deathbed confession that would shake Willow Creek to its core one final time. Detective James Morrison, a cold case investigator with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, received a call from a hospice nurse in Memphis. A patient, dying of pancreatic cancer, claimed to have information about the Natalie Howard case. The patient's name was Robert Pritchard, 78 years old, brother to David Allen Pritchard. James drove to Memphis that same day, arriving at the hospice facility as evening fell. Robert Pritchard lay in a narrow bed, his body wasted by disease, an oxygen cannula in his nose. But his eyes were clear, focused, carrying the weight of decades of silence. "I don't have much time," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I need to tell someone the truth before I meet my maker." James pulled out his recording device. "Mr. Pritchard, anything you say can be used." "I know," Robert interrupted. "I don't care about legal consequences anymore. I'm dying. But I can't die with this secret." He took a labored breath. "My brother David didn't act alone that night. I was with him." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. James felt his pulse accelerate. "Go on." Robert's story spilled out in fragments, interrupted by coughing fits and pauses for oxygen. He and David had been working together, David as the church janitor, Robert helping him unofficially. They'd both noticed Natalie, her kindness, her beauty, the way she lit up every room she entered. "David became obsessed," Robert said. "He talked about her constantly, said she was an angel, that God had sent her to save him from his demons. I told him to leave her alone, but he wouldn't listen." On November 2nd, 2011, David had hidden in the church after everyone left. He'd watched Natalie help Marcus Webb clean up, watched her leave. Then he'd followed her to Pinewood Trail. "He called me frantic," Robert continued, said he'd approached her, tried to talk to her, and she'd gotten scared, tried to run. He grabbed her scarf to stop her, and she fell, hit her head on a rock. He panicked, called me for help. James's hands were shaking as he took notes. "What did you do?" "I drove out there, found David standing over her body, crying, saying it was an accident. She was already gone. We wrapped her in a tarp from my truck and drove to Miller's Bend. We knew the area. Our uncle used to take us fishing there as kids. We buried her. And Marcus Webb? Robert's face contorted. We didn't know he'd be there. After we buried Natalie, we were driving back and saw headlights coming down the access road. We hid in the trees and watched. It was Marcus Webb driving slow, looking around. We didn't know why he was there. We just waited until he left, then got the hell out. Marcus said Natalie called him that night. Maybe she did before David grabbed her. I don't know. But Marcus didn't kill her. He was just unlucky. In the wrong place at the wrong time. James leaned forward. Why didn't you come forward? An innocent man went to prison. Tears streamed down Robert's face. Because I was a coward. David begged me to stay quiet. Said if I talked, we'd both go to prison for the rest of our lives. And I convinced myself it was an accident, that it wasn't really murder, that Marcus had lied to police anyway, so maybe he deserved some punishment. I told myself every lie I could think of to justify my silence. Your brother died in 2019. I know, and I've lived with this guilt every day since. I thought about coming forward 1,000 times. But I was afraid. I have children, grandchildren. I didn't want them to know what I'd done. But now, facing death, facing judgment, I can't keep this secret anymore. Robert died 3 days later. His confession was authenticated, verified through details only someone present at the crime could have known. He described the exact location of the grave before it was discovered, mentioned the tarp had a blue stripe that matched fibers found with Natalie's remains, recalled that Natalie's phone had fallen into the creek near Pinewood Trail during the struggle, explaining why it stopped pinging. The revelation devastated Willow Creek all over again. Marcus Webb had been innocent, not just of murder but of any involvement whatsoever. He'd gone to prison because he tried to help Natalie, because he'd lied when he panicked, because the evidence had aligned in a perfect storm of circumstantial guilt. Linda Webb, now 98 and in declining health, gave her final interview from her nursing home. Marcus told me the truth from the beginning, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. He said Natalie called him, that he went looking for her, that he lied to police because he was scared. And I believed him. I believed him every day for 19 years until he died in that prison. I wish he'd lived to see this day, to see his name fully cleared. The state of Tennessee issued a formal apology to Linda Webb and Marcus's children, 2 sons, now in their 50s, who'd grown up with the stigma of having a father convicted of murder. The governor announced a comprehensive review of all cases involving circumstantial evidence and convictions without physical proof of the defendant's direct involvement in the crime. The Willow Creek Baptist Church held a special service to honor Marcus Webb's memory. Pastor Gregory Finch had died years earlier, but the current pastor, a woman named Reverend Sarah Chun, no relation to Amara, led the congregation in prayers of repentance and reconciliation. We failed Marcus Webb, she said from the pulpit. We, his community, his church family, abandoned him in his darkest hour. We believed the worst because the evidence made it easy to believe. We forgot that doubt should favor the accused, that grace should be our first response, not our last. Today we ask for forgiveness, from God, from Marcus's memory, from his family. The service was attended by hundreds, including many who'd been vocal in condemning Marcus after his arrest. Some wept openly. Others sat in stunned silence, processing the magnitude of the injustice. Marcus's sons, Thomas and Daniel Webb, sat in the front pew. After the service, Thomas stood to address the congregation. My father died believing that one day the truth would come out, he said. He used to write us letters from prison, always ending with the same words. The truth is stronger than lies, and light overcomes darkness. He never got to see his vindication in this life. But we, his family, take comfort in knowing that he's been fully exonerated. We forgive this community because that's what he would have wanted. But we also challenge you to remember this feeling, this shame, this regret, the next time you're tempted to rush to judgment. The applause was thunderous, cathartic, a collective release of guilt and grief. Maya Rodriguez stood in the memorial garden on a crisp autumn morning, 70 years to the day after Natalie Howard's disappearance. She was now 84 years old, using a walker, but her mind remained sharp and her commitment to Natalie's legacy unwavering. The garden had evolved yet again. A new section had been added, the Marcus Webb Memorial Grove, dedicated to the man who'd been wrongly convicted and to all victims of wrongful imprisonment. It featured a bronze statue of Marcus sitting on a bench, a Bible in his hands, his face turned upward as if in prayer. The inscription beneath read, Marcus Webb, 1973 to 2048. Youth leader, volunteer, friend. Wrongly accused, falsely imprisoned, ultimately vindicated. May we never forget the cost of rushing to judgment. Next to the Marcus Webb Grove stood the original Natalie Howard Memorial, now surrounded by plaques honoring the 847 scholarship recipients who'd earned teaching degrees over 7 decades. The foundation had expanded beyond Tennessee, offering scholarships nationwide, touching lives across America. Maya watched as school children ran through the playground section of the garden, their laughter echoing off the trees. A group of college students sat in a circle on the grass, studying together. An elderly couple walked hand in hand down one of the winding paths. This was the legacy of tragedy transformed. This was what happened when a community chose to respond to darkness with light, to death with life, to hatred with love. Maya. She turned to see a young woman approaching, maybe 30 years old, with kind eyes and a nervous smile. I'm Jessica Pritchard, the woman said. Robert Pritchard was my grandfather. Maya's breath caught. I see. I know this is uncomfortable, but I wanted you to know that my family has established a fund to compensate the Webb family. It won't undo the harm, but it's something. And we've made a donation to the Natalie Howard Foundation in her memory. Maya studied the young woman's face, seeing the shame and sadness there, but also courage. That's very generous. It's the least we can do, Jessica said. My grandfather's confession, it destroyed our family in some ways, but it also freed us. We don't have to carry his secret anymore. And maybe, in some small way, we can help carry on Natalie's legacy instead. Maya reached out and took Jessica's hand. Natalie believed that every person deserved a chance at redemption. Every person deserved kindness. I think she'd appreciate what you're doing. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. That means more than you know. 70 years later, 2081. The documentary series Innocence and Legacy, the complete story of Natalie Howard and Marcus Webb, won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Documentary Series. It was a comprehensive, 8-part examination of the case, featuring never-before-seen footage, interviews with key players, and an unflinching look at how the criminal justice system could fail even with the best intentions. The final episode focused not on the crime or the investigation, but on the legacy. It showed the Memorial Garden in all its splendor, now recognized as a National Historic Landmark. It featured interviews with dozens of scholarship recipients, now ranging in age from 28 to 75, all of whom credited the Natalie Howard Scholarship with changing their lives. One segment highlighted a now-famous teacher named Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, who'd received the scholarship in 2035 and gone on to revolutionize early childhood education in underserved communities. She developed a curriculum used in schools across America, touching millions of children's lives. None of this would have been possible without that scholarship, Dr. Okonkwo said in her interview. And every time I walk into a classroom, every time I see a child's face light up with understanding, I think of Natalie Howard. I think about how one person's commitment to kindness created ripples that are still spreading 70 years later. The series ended with footage of the annual scholarship ceremony, now held in a massive auditorium in Nashville to accommodate the thousands who attended. 50 young women received scholarships that year, each one standing to share how they plan to honor Natalie's legacy in their own teaching careers. The final shot was of the Memorial Garden at sunset, the bronze statues of Natalie and Marcus silhouetted against the orange sky, the fountain trickling peacefully, children's laughter fading as families headed home. A narrator's voice, warm and reflective, spoke over the image. Natalie Howard lived for 22 years. She's been gone for 70. But her impact continues to grow, proving that a life measured not in years but in influence can last forever. And Marcus Webb, who spent 19 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, reminds us that justice delayed is not justice denied. That truth, however long it takes to emerge, is always worth pursuing. On the 75th anniversary of Natalie's death, Willow Creek unveiled its final addition to the Memorial Garden, a meditation labyrinth designed for reflection and healing. At its center stood a simple stone marker with words chosen by the foundation board, composed of former scholarship recipients. Here we remember Natalie Howard, whose light still shines in every teacher who believes in a child's potential. Here we remember Marcus Webb, whose innocence reminds us that mercy and careful judgment must always walk hand in hand. And here we commit ourselves to transforming tragedy into hope, darkness into light, and death into enduring life. Maya Rodriguez had passed away the previous year at age 93, surrounded by family, her final words a whisper. Tell them to keep the light shining. And they did. The foundation she'd led for 5 decades continued under new leadership. The garden she'd helped expand continued to bloom. The scholarships she'd championed continued to change lives. Because that's what legacy means. Not just remembering the past, but actively creating a better future. Not just honoring the dead, but serving the living. Not just mourning what was lost, but celebrating what endures. Natalie Howard's light was still shining, and it always would be. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel.